those cameras, and they're the ones that are manually moving those cameras up and down and trying to find Dragon and keep a focus on it so that we can have these amazing views here today.
And as Dragon, as you mentioned, that waypoint one point about 220 meters from the International Space Station, that's very close to, but just outside what's known as the keep out sphere for the International Space Station. This is the sphere that any visiting vehicle needs to stay outside of until given explicit permission to proceed in closer to the International Space Station. We would expect that go no go poll to either come when they're holding at waypoint one, or if they don't need to hold at waypoint one, shortly before they're to then proceed into waypoint 2, 20 meters from the station. Again, another point where they could hold if they need to. And we have on past flights seen them hold sometimes at that waypoint 2 20-meter point for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's alignment, sometimes it's been visuals and lighting conditions, with just where the International Space Station is in its orbit. Might seem kind of odd to think that, wait, why would we need to wait if we can dock at night? But shadows are really important, and understanding them and how they interplay with the autonomous navigation systems.
And so we're actually pretty close to that waypoint 0 mark. We're about 403 meters. So Dragon's about 403 meters away from the International Space Station. So just around that waypoint 0 mark that we've been talking about. Now Dragon will continue past that point and into waypoint 1, which is again that 220 meter mark. So it really is just a choreography that it follows throughout its final approach and docking today.
And if you think about the overall trajectory of approach here, you can kind of think of it as like an airplane that's in the air, where you're directly underneath it, but then you can walk in front of it and up to its nose. And that's sort of what Dragon's going to do here, moving from waypoint 0 up to waypoint 1.
So you were mentioning the keep out sphere. So that's one of those invisible boundaries. There's also the approach ellipsoid, which we mentioned a little bit earlier today, but Dragon's already inside of that approach ellipsoid. So that's outside of the keep out sphere. And that's that 4 kilometer by 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer boundary. Basically, it's the neighborhood of the International Space Station. So once a visiting vehicle such as Dragon, makes it into that approach ellipsoid, that's when a lot of those joint and integrated operations begin. And again, to enter into the AE, Dragon or any visiting vehicle has to be what is known, it has to be on what we call a 24-hour safe free drift trajectory, which means the spacecraft would not cross into the AE or the approach ellipsoid for at least 24 hours. So when they do those go, no-go polls to proceed in that is one of the things that they're looking for, making sure that that the vehicle is safe and can proceed in. And so now we're going inside that next invisible boundary around the space station, which is that keep out sphere that we've been mentioning.
And if you're just joining us here, some great views that are on your screen as Dragon is approaching the International Space Station just inside of 400 meters now, passing waypoint 0. On the left-hand side of your screen is a live view from the International Space Station looking down at Dragon. You can kind of see it moving across the white clouds there, about to go over the blue ocean in the middle of the screen there. And then on the right, we did have some images of the International Space Station and some images inside of Dragon as well. But Anna, it never gets old looking at views of spacecraft silhouetted against Earth.
And if we think these views are amazing, I just can't imagine what Crew 10 thinks of these views looking down at Earth from the Dragon spacecraft. So you did mention we were inside of waypoint 0.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. Approach 0 has started and trajectory has converged on waypoint 1. Expect arrival at waypoint 1 at approximately 0347 Zulu.
SpaceX Dragon on the big loop, copy 0347 Zulu for waypoint 1.
And you hear that sequence of calls there confirming that Dragon successfully passed waypoint 0 and the trajectory has aligned where we want it to waypoint 1. So everything going very, very good there. And we're expecting the arrival there at waypoint 1 in just about 25 minutes from now.
So once we get to waypoint 1, Dragon will be about 220 meters away from the International Space Station. So again, this is another checkpoint on the way to the International Space Station. And then that final checkpoint is waypoint 2, which is just 20 meters away. And then from there, we will have that initial contact and capture, what is known as soft capture, before those 12 hooks, 2 sets of 6 deploy to have that hard capture. And then they can begin releasing those umbilicals for data and power, and then begin the pressurization activities for the vestibule, which is that area between the station hatch and the Dragon hatch that had been previously exposed to the vacuum of space. They'll conduct some leak checks, and then, of course, welcome the new crew aboard the International Space Station.
And yesterday when we lifted off, we were talking about the precise second that we had to lift off to be in the correct plane to reach the International Space Station today. And liftoff times are very choreographed, tightly choreographed to make sure we can do this. But once we get into orbit, it becomes a little bit different, right? And the timings of various burns, the timings of arrivals can all change. And that's basically because you've got Earth's gravity pulling on the spacecraft, you've got the moon, you've got some of the other planets, and the orbits, we do really good at predicting them, but once we see what the spacecraft is actually doing, it helps us refine those timelines a little bit like we saw today. And the timings of those burns changing a little bit, maybe not needing to do some of them if Dragon is doing really well. So it really is interesting how it shifts from super precise to now we've got to see what they're actually doing in space.
Typically, when we have a launch, so we have what's known as a targeted docking window. So then, of course, it shifts a little based on those burns, whereas the launch itself is an instantaneous launch window, so it has to go at that exact minute and second. So again, yesterday's launch took place at 7:03 p.m. Eastern, 4:03 p.m. Pacific, and since then, Dragon has had about a 28-hour journey to make its way to the International Space Station. Dragon is now just about 330 meters away from the International Space Station. It's now inside waypoint 0, approaching waypoint 1, which is that 220-meter mark.
I do wonder why they always use what we used to call valley girls
and enter inside what is known as the
to do all these broadcasts. They all talking like baby talk, don't they?
Around the International Space Station before we have that docking. So it's been a long journey for Crew 10 since launch yesterday, and even before that, because they had all of those preparations leading up to launch, getting suited up, those final medical checks, all of the various processes that they went through prior to that liftoff at 7:03 p.m. Eastern, 4:03 p.m. Pacific. So I'm sure they will be glad to be welcomed on board the International Space Station in really just a few minutes from now.
Yeah, and after that liftoff yesterday, and after the crew initially got onto orbit, there were some things that they needed to do as Dragon, configured itself for the orbital journey up to the International Space Station today. The crew got some time to eat, they got some time to rest and relax as well over the course of the last 28 hours. So it hasn't just been fully in their suits, in their seats. They were able to take those suits off shortly after liftoff. They are, of course, back in those suits now because during the more critical operations of spaceflight, such as launch, docking, undocking, and reentry and splashdown, we do have the crews in those intravehicular activity suits, or IVA suits as we call them.
So you'd mentioned a little bit some of the free time that they've had without those suits. They did have that sleep period. They woke up today around 8 a.m. Central, 8 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Central. So they've been up for about 10 hours or so getting ready for today's docking operations, but they did have that time to take a nap and get well rested and ready to be part of the Expedition 72 crew. And also on the International Space Station, not that long ago, the ISS crew was actually asleep right before we came on air. So they finished those post-sleep operations that they go through to start getting ready for today's docking operations. Again, NASA astronaut Nick Hague will be monitoring Dragon's approach.
And SpaceX Dragon on the big loop. Expect reconfiguration of C2V2 return link to support docking video shortly.
SpaceX Dragon, copy.
And that call basically saying that that C2V2, the common communication for visiting vehicle system that
You're
allows
always
Dragon to
welcome,
talk to
sir.
the
Thank you.
ISS, the ISS to talk to the ground, it just sort of creates some nice redundant communication paths for all the vehicles and all the teams involved today. That system was primarily configured for the initial approach of Dragon up to the station through waypoint 0, and we just heard them briefing the crew that they'll be reconfiguring that again for the docking portion.
So we'll continue to hear a lot of those call outs from the ground teams
Greetings, San
in
Antonio.
the
It turned me down a
astronauts
little
on the
bit for a
International Space
minute.
Station, as well as Dragon, as
The
we
voice is
continue
driving
to
me
get
crazy.
into the final stages of docking today. Right now, Dragon is about
How's everybody doing
310
tonight? Can you hear
meters
me okay?
away from
Too
the
loud, too
International
soft?
Space Station and continuing to fly
Too
in to make
Maximus?
its final approach and docking. So it's getting pretty close now. And there you're continuing to see, if you squint, you can see a view of Dragon there in the center of your
Uh-oh, we
screen.
lost Cobb.
So again, these are views captured by cameras on the International Space Station. And so that is the Dragon Endurance spacecraft. And it's actually the 4th flight for that Endurance spacecraft. It previously flew 3 other commercial crew program missions, Crew 3, Crew 5, and Crew 7. And the 4th flight, obviously, today for Crew 10.
That's right. And overall, this is the 10th crew rotation mission for NASA's Commercial Crew Program that Dragon is flying. It's also Dragon's 14th human spaceflight mission.
Who's old
to
enough
the
out there to
International
remember
Space Station,
Valley
and
Girl
Dragon's 16th
back in the
human
80s?
spaceflight mission overall, since Dragons don't always
This
go to
woman
the
is like,
International
oh my
Space Station,
gosh,
but we have had
we're in
2
space.
free flyer missions in the Inspiration 4 and Polaris Dawn missions as well. And with today, and with the Crew 10
They're going
mission,
like really
Dragon has
fast,
carried
and
60
it's
crew
like a
members at this
spaceship,
point
and there's like
across its
fire.
16 missions.
My God. Moon unit Zappa. Yeah, and
So,
the
this Dragon has had 10 rotational missions.
how can I say this? The men do tend to be a little bit
part
more
of NASA's Commercial Crew Program.
meta.
We also
Is
have,
that
of course, the
offensive?
Commercial Resupply Services, and we have
I mean,
the
I grew
Commercial
up on
Earth
Walter
Orbit Development
Cronkite.
Program, working on potential future commercial space stations. So space is really becoming a commercial
Like
public-private endeavor.
Totally.
And you see that here as Dragon is docking to the International Space Station, obviously a government platform, but commercial partners bringing crew and cargo and things to the International Space Station. Again, once Crew 10 is on board the International Space Station, they will partake in a multitude of science experiments, technology demonstrations.
I don't know what's going to happen when they dock, if it's going to be like another hour before they get out of the ship. I'm hoping they're going to get out and hug and ring the bell, and then we can just all go
final
home.
approach to the International Space Station, now about 370 meters away. Let's go ahead and turn it back over to NASA's Gary Jordan at NASA's Mission Control Center in
Gary. Hi, Gary.
Hey, thank you, Anna. We are following along on the action here. Now inside the approach ellipsoid, we are in what is called joint operations. Both teams in each of the flight control rooms here in Houston, as well as where you are, Anna, at the Mission Control Center over in Hawthorne, California, with the SpaceX teams, are operating by the same joint flight rules. They're working through the procedures step by step, doing go, no-go polls along the way to make sure that all teams are ready for the next steps. The teams here in Mission Control Houston are currently polling to make sure that we can pass waypoint 1 and go inside waypoint 2. When we pass waypoint 1, we're going to be inside what is called the keep out sphere. Now,
yeah, the launch was good. I didn't cover that because I wasn't sure if it was going to go, but we've seen
and a new set of conditions to make sure that the crew can proceed all the way to docking. Currently scheduled again for tonight at 11 p.m. Central Time, 9 p.m. Pacific. So the station is continuing to prepare for the crew's arrival. Like as I mentioned before, the station's solar arrays are feathered. We did configure the station itself to begin the docking attitude, and teams here are working through the C2V2 system, the common communication for visiting vehicles, power cycling that and make sure that data is flowing between the 2 spacecraft, the International Space Station and Crew 10 Endurance, and that Crew 10, when it's on the docking axis, right in front of the International Space Station.
Why is this guy talking like he's at a golf tournament?
Has a perfect view of the docking ring, of the docking port, the international docking adapter. And as it closes its way in, has all the data.
Dragon is transmitting
they
docking
said,
camera
like
video.
Jay, they said 8:30, but
video and data
I guess I
updating
can't
in the
hold them to
Dragon
that.
docking monitor.
Ooh, space silence. But what they're going to do is they're going to just take it, stick it in the little hole. It's, a soft docking. And then they're going to catch. Like, oh my gosh.
That was Capcom Tess Caswell here in Mission Control.
Where are you,
Houston,
Johnny in the
standing
castle?
by for
Or Niska?
confirmation from the
Sorry
crew
about that.
aboard Endurance. This was the troubleshooting issue I was addressing with the Common Communications for Visiting Vehicles, power cycling that system to make sure that they could have that video once they get on the station's docking axis. As we wait for crew confirmation, we are getting
So
video
true, Manny.
from the
It is
International
pretty
Space
amazing.
Station's external cameras.
Well, it looks awful round for being flat.
And Houston Station on the big loop, I can confirm I have good centerline camera. Station looks beautiful.
Get me off here.
Houston copies.
Now it's critical that the teams communicate on this big loop to make sure all stakeholders are aware of the progress that's being made. That's cycling to enable Nick Hague, who's aboard the International Space Station. He's got a display in front of him monitoring the docking operations and receiving data from Dragon itself into the International Space Station. This is a safeguard. Dragon's rendezvous and docking to the International Space Station is a fully automated
I
process.
shouldn't make fun of anybody.
However,
I
Hague
get
does
enough
have the
people making
ability
fun of my
to
voice.
execute commands if necessary, but really only there for monitoring. So that C2V2 power cycling allows him to have the view from Dragon itself as it moves up towards the docking axis, which you're seeing now on your screen from the external cameras aboard the International Space Station. Hague monitoring Dragon's arrival.
I was joking about the
receiving
flat
data
part of the Earth.
including range and range
Round.
rate, making sure that Dragon is moving at the expected velocity, speed, position. Everything's positioned on board the International Space Station for docking. Again, the station itself at the docking attitude. Now again, the station teams
that's a
here
great picture.
in the International Space Station flight control room polling to make sure that Dragon itself can proceed past waypoint 1 towards waypoint 2. Waypoint 2 being just 20 meters in front of the International Space Station's docking port. This will be inside the keep out sphere. It is Nick Hague monitoring the operations from the International Space Station. Now, once it makes its way in to dock with the space station, it'll be NASA astronaut Butch Willmore that is tasked with the responsibility of opening up the hatches and preparing the station to welcome the crew aboard Endurance. This includes opening up several hatches, including the Node 2 hatch and the APAS hatch, both of which are closed for the docking operations and cannot be opened until the docking is complete. He'll start venting air to make sure that the air is circulating properly through the pressurized mating adapter.
Yeah, broken speaker. It's been a while since I've had a good docking too, but
a safety procedure. When he's going to inspect the hatch, he'll be wearing goggles and gloves for safety measures. We'll cover all of that post-docking, but that'll be Butch Willmore's responsibility. We'll also be getting camera views from inside the station. These were set up by NASA astronaut Don Pettit. The crew waking up and making sure on an early day aboard the International Space Station, much earlier than their typical day. In fact, their crew wake period was just after midnight Greenwich Mean Time,
it's a cool capsule
the time that they operate aboard the International Space Station. They were up and making sure that everything was prepared for Crew 10's arrival today. Now we're making our way up the docking axis, beautiful views as Endurance makes its way above the horizon of the Earth. Again, it's making its way towards the docking axis. This is immediately in front of the International Space Station. Camera views from Dragon itself illuminating.
I love this part as it gets bigger and bigger the closer it comes.
You can see the original solar arrays of the International Space Station, as well as the IROSAs, the rollout solar arrays that are augmenting some of the station's power. this as part of a process to continue the science done aboard the International Space Station, which is, of course, the mission of the astronauts and cosmonaut aboard Crew 10.
You know, hearing this guy, come to think of it,
Crew
Jim
10
Nance
really
would be
just a
great at
transport
this.
mission to
You know,
get
the
to
guy
the
that calls
International
the
Space
golf
Station. Once there, they join Expedition 72
quietly.
for at least a time. Don Pettit, NASA astronaut Don Pettit, will be returning aboard a Soyuz. Once that Soyuz undocks, crew on board the International Space Station officially begins Expedition 73, continuing the great science and technology
I think the hatch
demonstrations
is
that are
winking at him.
necessary in low Earth orbit to prepare for future human missions to deep space, including the moon and to Mars.
Man, Boeing could learn a lot from SpaceX on how to design a capsule.
Camera views
I
from
think it's cool.
inside Dragon Endurance showing displays that show some of the trajectory that is necessary to converge with the docking axis. This is waypoint 1. Now, when you see those displays, you'll see the trajectory curve out, the spacecraft itself calculating breakout maneuvers that are necessary as it makes its way along the planned set of procedures and approach maneuvers. Waypoint 1, immediately in front of the docking axis, once that is executed, the Dragon will fire its Draco thrusters.
I don't care much about
maneuver
comments,
inside.
but I'll tell you right now, I am not getting into politics with anybody on this subject. I'm just going to enjoy this moment and be glad that Butch and Sundance are coming home. Everything else, if you guys want to talk about it, that's fine. Just keep it civil, but I'm not here to talk politics. Not tonight. Oh, I can't take the silence. So that picture of the ISS is coming from the capsule, the Dragon, right?
We're inside 6 minutes from the planned arrival of Waypoint 1, continuing to get these fantastic views provided from the International Space Station, as well as from inside Dragon itself. Commander Ann McLean, as well as pilot Nicole Ayers, you see positioned as the camera in between them, shows them in their launch and entry suits.
Yeah, they got a military crew on this one.
We did hear before that they are allowed to bring up their visors through these set of procedures. Those suits are donned prior to joint operations, and they'll close their visors as part of the next dynamic phase, which will be the docking, just as an added safety measure. Endurance less than 300 meters from the International Space Station, being illuminated by an orbital sunset right now. The views you see of Earth and of Dragon will start to get a little darker as we enter into an orbital sunset and orbital nighttime. Dragon, now brightened by the sun, will start to dim, and you'll start to see the docking lights as well as the navigation lights. Docking light will be white at the center of the spacecraft, and you'll see green and red lights on the forward bulkhead, green indicating the starboard position, red indicating the port position. The International Space Station cameras sometimes view from an upside down position, as you can see from this view, as the Earth is on the top left of your screen. So the port and starboard navigation light positions will be reversed, but it's because the camera is sort of upside down from the position of Earth. Additionally, the cameras on board the International Space Station are subject to the radiation environment of the station. Now, the station itself does receive a certain amount of radiation, but also a certain amount of protection from the Earth's atmosphere. As we are in low Earth orbit, 250 miles from the Earth is not terribly far. There's still a decent amount of protection, but there is a higher radiation environment. When we enter into an orbital nighttime, some of the cameras, you'll start to see some pixels, different colors on the camera. As we enter into an orbital nighttime, those pixels and different colors become a little bit more apparent. Those are from the radiation environment, the radiation damaging the pixels inside the cameras themselves. Inside 3 minutes from waypoint 1 arrival, we do have a go to proceed past waypoint 1. So Dragon, what you'll see is not a pause at waypoint 1, but it should proceed towards the keep out sphere. You'll notice some of the views change throughout our coverage here. The feeds coming from Dragon, you can see illuminating the International Space Station. Those feeds provided by ground
SpaceX
stations.
On the big loop, approach 1 and soft capture ring extension will begin shortly. Dragon will continue its approach to waypoint 2.
Sorry about that.
SpaceX, Dragon, copy all.
And that relayed from the SpaceX core in Hawthorne, California, confirmed by the crew aboard Endurance. We are proceeding inside the keep out sphere. You are seeing the docking light begin to blink at the center of Dragon Endurance. Features of Dragon becoming a little bit more apparent. The nose cone fully open, exposing the docking ring and the forward bulk of the Dracos. You did hear that Dragon will extend the soft docking ring mechanism. This allows for a cushioned contact as Dragon makes its way toward the International Docking Adapter. Docking comes in several phases, which includes contact and a soft capture, which is initiated by the docking ring.
You're welcome, Yeti. Thank you for watching.
That docking ring is
I
retracted
really appreciate it.
to pull
I do.
Dragon in closer to the International Space Station, and then begin a sequence to hard dock Dragon to the International Space Station. There are 12 hooks that are driven to really latch
You too, Desert Man.
Dragon
Thank
to
you.
the International Space Station.
Everybody, for tuning
They're
into my little
deployed
show.
in 2 sets of 6. And those will be confirmed by the crew. Once all of the hooks are driven, there is also an umbilical that extends and connects to an interface on the International Space Station side to provide power and data transfer between the 2 vehicles. Dragon right now operating on battery power and solar power that's generated from
What
the
a great
trunk.
picture.
Once Dragon attaches to the International Space Station, it'll be receiving power from the International Space Station through the duration of its stay aboard. We did hear confirmation that Dragon is passing waypoint 1. So we're now moving inside the
Johnny.
docking axis and towards the
I think
keep
I'll
out
leave this
sphere.
one up a little longer. Not many people love my video today. I don't know if it's YouTube or just my choice of content. It's a good one.
Now passing waypoint 1, Dragon Endurance heading towards the International Space Station. We're following along from here inside Mission Control Houston, working jointly with the teams in Hawthorne, California, to take us through the next series of steps, including crossing the keep out sphere and heading towards waypoint 2. Let's send it back over to Anna and Chris in Hawthorne.
Woo.
And thanks, Gary. Yeah, as so we have passed waypoint 1, so waypoint 2 is what is up next, and that will put Dragon only about 20 meters.
Station Houston on the Big Loop. Monitor approach per step 3 of 1.102 Dragon approach and retreat monitoring. Let us know when your review is complete and you are ready for docking.
She sounds like a boss. I like that.
You heard that.
Station copies on the Big Loop step 3, and I can confirm that review is complete and we're ready for docking.
So that call there between the ISS flight control room and the crew on board the International Space Station.
Houston copies. At waypoint 2, Dragon will hold for approximately 5 minutes.
And you heard that call there indicating that the ISS
Thanks for the heads up.
and the crew there are now ready for Dragon's docking to the forward docking adapter of the Harmony module of the International Space Station. Dragon approaching waypoint 2, which is the point about 20 meters from the International Space Station's forward docking adapter. And as we did just hear there, we are expecting Dragon to hold for about 5 minutes once it reaches that point. It crossed through waypoint 1 and waypoint 0 without having to hold. But again, these waypoints or checkpoints are places we can hold if we need to, and if we don't, we can proceed forward.
Sometimes you got to
So
hold
we
your
have
Dragon.
gone through 2 of those waypoints, so waypoint 0 and 1, and so now Dragon is less than 200 meters away from the International Space Station, about 170 meters currently away from its target of that forward node 2 forward docking port. And there you're seeing a great view on your screen of the Dragon Endurance spacecraft as it makes its final approach to the International Space Station. The teams in Mission Control Houston the teams at the International Space, or not the International Space Station, the SpaceX Mission Control teams behind us are, of course, doing some final go, no-go polls for docking. It's one of the final checkpoints between those teams.
When I was a kid,
to make
that
sure everyone
fascinated me
is good to proceed and to
NASA.
dock. We did
I don't know
hear
where it
that
was.
there will likely be a brief hold at waypoint 2. And again, that waypoint 2 is just 20 meters away from the International Space Station, so very close at that point. So they will hold briefly, and then from there, we will have our final approach and docking. We will have an initial soft capture. We did hear that the soft capture ring was being extended a few minutes ago. And then from there, they will begin to deploy those hooks, 2 sets of 6 for a total of 12 hooks to get that hard capture. And during that final hold, that again, we're expecting around the waypoint 2 mark, which is 20 meters away from the space station. During that final hold, they can possibly wait for better lighting conditions. So the space station does have exterior lights and Dragon can dock in the dark. But of course, we go through an orbit every 90 minutes. So there's a sunrise and sunset every 45 minutes. So if they need to wait for a little bit of improvement in the lighting conditions, they can use that waypoint 2 hold opportunity to wait for things like that, ensure final alignment, ensure everyone is good to go for that final approach and docking.
And as we could see right there, right before we switch to the inside view there,
that's
a
not
great
me
view on the
breathing.
outside. You can see that we're passing into an orbital sunset here.
Somebody's got an
approaching
open mic.
orbital night. And you can see how that lighting is very different on board
While
the
they hold
International
their
Space Station.
Dragon.
But what I love about that view too is you can see the forward navigation strobe light from Dragon illuminating the forward element of the International Space Station where it will be
Seriously.
docking just
That is
a
not
few
me breathing.
minutes from
That's
now.
them.
And of course, approaching waypoint 20. This a view now from the International Space Station looking at Dragon. You can see the white navigation light indicating the center of the docking alignment axis there. And the green light that you see is the starboard navigation light. So just helping the folks on the International Space Station keep track of Dragon's orientation there. And the red one that just came into view is for the port side orientation. And I really love this too as we get into orbital night, as we're approaching the space station, because we're probably going to see Dragon's Draco thrusters pulsing, and that's always a sight to behold in orbital night.
And so Dragon and the International Space Station.
Soft capture ring extension complete.
This video seems to be exceptional. These pictures from this one for some reason.
We just heard confirmation that that soft capture ring extension has been fully completed. So that extension of the soft capture ring, it's fully out and ready for that soft capture, that initial contact with the International Space Station. So right now, the International Space Station and Dragon are currently flying over Canada. and they're continuing to make its final approach to the International Space Station, currently just over 100
old enough
meters
for the
away
moon
as it makes its
landings
way to that waypoint 2, which
and
is
all the
20 meters away.
shuttle
So
explosions,
a
and everything
little
in
over 80
between.
meters to go to the international, or to that waypoint 2, and then that final initial capture, and then we'll have the hooks deploy and
Do
have
we know
that
who
hard
this woman
capture
is?
milestone.
I've never heard of her. Is
Now,
she
if you're
somebody
looking
or
there
no?
at the SpaceX Mission Control here in Hawthorne, California, where we are, Dragon up on orbit as it is approaching waypoint 2 on that docking axis for the forward docking adapter. It's approaching the space station very, very slowly, about a few tenths of a meter per second. And it's also trying to keep in proper alignment with that docking port. But again, waypoint 2 is where we're going to stop based on the calls, and we can do some final alignments there and final checkouts. But so far so good for Dragon. About 28 hours after liftoff now, after lifting off from the Kennedy Space Center yesterday afternoon at 7:03 p.m., completing the docking in just a few minutes from now.
And so Dragon is now less than 100 meters away from the International Space Station as it continues to make that final approach. And so right now we're seeing those live views of the SpaceX Mission Control team here in Hawthorne, California. And typically we'll go back to these views when we do have those brief loss of signal between the International Space Station and Dragon and the ground. And we'll regain those views shortly. It's just a handover between satellites. So that tracking and data relay satellite system that the International Space Station relies on, they have a brief handover period.
I'm going to bring her down for a second. I told you I'm not going to talk politics, and I'm not. But I want to say something to the 300 plus that are assembled out of my 100,000 whatever subscribers. I'm not going to stop covering SpaceX and Elon Musk related space stories. I don't care what he does or anybody else does in their private life. Just like if you studied your history, you'll know that the Apollo program was born from, guys we captured from Germany during the war. But I'm going to cover space. And if people get triggered by the fact that Elon Musk is now in charge of SpaceX when they used to like him and they don't like him now, there's nothing I can do about that. But I don't care what he does politically. I don't care what anybody does in their private life when they're holding their dragon or not holding their dragon. If it's space, if it's aviation, or if I think it's newsworthy, we're going to talk about it. And I hope you'll watch it and you'll click on it. And don't get sidetracked by whatever's going on behind them. Otherwise, none of us would be using iPhones or pretty much everything we're watching at the moment if we took that kind of stand. But I've seen some comments lately, and I want to let you guys know I'm going to cover SpaceX when I cover it, and there's no political slant. It's not because I have a poster of Elon Musk in my room or anybody else. It's just the news and it's space, and that's what I'm going to do. So spread the word. If it's worthy, I'm going to show it. Okay, I'm done.
Mission Control in Houston to the crew on the International Space Station, mentioning that the exercise.
Let's bring her beautiful voice back up.
We have visiting vehicles such as Dragon arriving, departing the International Space Station. There are constraints on crew exercise, and that's basically to prevent additional loads from being imparted on the station during these dynamic operations.
And I love this sort of night vision-esque view here from Dragon looking at the International Space Station. So this is a view from the Dragon Endurance carrying the Crew 10 crew. The forward docking port there is in the center of your screen, sort of being illuminated every few seconds by that light from Dragon. And what I love about this is you can see the Crew 9 Dragon directly above that docking port. And of course, Crew 9 going to be coming home after a brief handover period with the Crew 10 crew.
Thank you, Johnny. Will do.
And then inside of Dragon Endurance here, you have Commander Ann McClain on the left-hand side of your screen, pilot Nicole Ayers on the right.
Dude, only make his Teslas look
that
good on the inside.
Cosmonaut Kirill Peskov,
the car, but they
and
are
on
boring
Ann's
inside.
left is JAXA, or Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency astronaut Takuya Onishi. Ann and Takuya are returning to the International Space Station for their second long-duration missions, and Nicole and Kirill are on their first missions to space.
So it's getting pretty real for The 4 crew members that
Kinda,
make up
just a little
Crew
bit more.
10 right now,
I'm gonna
they
shut up.
are just under 25 meters
Do
away
their
from the
thing.
International Space Station, so just outside of that waypoint 2, which is that point at which Dragon will hold for a few minutes.
On the big loop, you see we're approaching waypoint 2. Crew visors are closed.
Cue the 70s music now.
Copy.
You know what I
Crew 10
mean?
visors are closed.
We did just hear that confirmation that the crew is approaching waypoint 2, so they see that on those screens in front of them. They see the distance, and they're able to monitor that approach as well.
And this is great because you can see Dragon's Draco thrusters firing here. You've got the red and the green navigation lights as well as the white one, but all those little flashes and pulses that you're seeing around the vehicle are the thrusters, keeping that alignment as we continue to approach waypoint 2, 20 meters from the ISS, where again, we are expecting to hold for a few minutes up. And you can see we're really getting close considering now we're really illuminating that forward docking port with Dragon.
And so Dragon is actually at that waypoint 2 mark now, just around 20 meters away. So we will have that hold briefly. And recently, the team in Mission Control Houston did conduct their final go, no go pull as
Dragon
well for docking.
SpaceX on the big loop. Dragon is holding at waypoint
Dan, I
2
think that's
for
because of
Dragon
the lighting.
assessment.
And I don't think those are stars in the background.
You hear that
But
confirmation.
correct me if I'm wrong.
And you hear that confirmation that Dragon is holding. Now you're on the left-hand side of your screen as you're looking from the ISS's camera out at Dragon. Even though we've said Dragon is holding, you're still going to see some of those thruster pulses because holding in space is not like just stopping your car that holds the same position.
And Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. Ground is bold go and will be enabling approach shortly. Confirm crew readiness for final approach.
SpaceX Dragon, Crew 10 is ready for final approach.
That is so cool.
And that is great words there to hear from SpaceX Mission Control.
Resume has been commanded. Reminder, once Dragon is inside the crew hands-off point, retreat and breakout are not permitted.
Copy.
And Anna, here we go.
So we did just hear that they have the go to resume final approach, so that we had that brief hold completed at waypoint 2, which was just 20 meters away from the International Space Station. So Dragon will now resume its final approach and finish its fly into the International Space Station's Node 2 forward docking port.
And we heard
Dragon is in approach 2.
Your good confirmation of Dragon in that approach 2 mode, meaning it has passed waypoint 2 and is coming into the station. Again, you can see
Station Houston on the big loop. Dragon is on final approach and is go for docking. Monitor per steps 5 and 6 in 1.102 Dragon approach and retreat monitoring.
Station copy.
and that was the call from the International Space Station Flight Control Room to the crew on the ISS. Again, just everyone confirming, making sure everyone's on the same page, as Dragon is now very close to docking with the International Space Station here today.
And so Dragon is now just 17 meters away from the International Space Station and continuing to close in on its target. Coming up here shortly, we will likely hear that call out for CHOP, which stands for Crew Hands Off Point. That typically takes place less than 30 seconds before docking. So as soon as you hear that, you know that that docking will take place very soon after. And then at that point, when we hear the CHOP call out, any aborts will have to be done automatically by Dragon. And so also on the International Space Station, we have NASA astronaut Nick Hague monitoring this final approach. And then once Dragon is docked, NASA astronaut Butch Willmore will walk through those
I don't remember seeing it before. Maybe I just didn't watch it
on board. And Dragon is now less than 14 meters away from the International Space Station and continuing that final approach.
These very delicate series of maneuvers now. Dragon approaching very, very slowly relative to the International Space Station. Again, we talked earlier that launch is all about accelerating the vehicles to orbital velocity. And even though both Dragon and the ISS are traveling at about 17,500 miles per hour or 27,500 kilometers per hour, they are moving very, very slow, like 1/10 of a meter per second in relation to each other right now.
This is crazy.
Dragon now at about 10 meters away from the International Space Station. We're standing by for that call out for CHOP here shortly.
SpaceX Dragon, 10 meters.
Copy, 10.
And again, you're looking at the forward docking port of the International Space Station, which is mounted to the Harmony or Node 2 module of the
This is
space
all
station.
man-made stuff. How
The
crazy is
the
that?
Crew 9 Dragon, which has been there since September, is also attached to a docking port on this module. And that Dragon is actually just off the top of your screen there as Crew 10's Dragon comes in for docking in just a few moments. And I love these views again. You've got the Dragon, you've got the ISS staring at Dragon on the left-hand side of your screen, and you've got Dragon looking at its docking port on the ISS on the right.
And Dragon is now less than 7 meters away from the International Space Station as it continues to make that final approach.
Sorry.
Traveling with a range rate of less than 0.082, which, as you mentioned earlier, it continues to get slower and slower as we make this final approach.
5 meters.
Copy, 5 meters.
So the next call we should hear is chop or that crew hands off period, followed moments later by docking.
That typically comes at about 2 meters away from the International Space Station. Right now, we're less than 4 meters away.
Nice. Oh, look at that. They need to hire like a real narrator.
Less than 3 meters away.
2 meters. Please hands off.
Copy, hands off.
There is the chop call.
Standing by for initial contact of Dragon to the International Space Station.
Here it comes. Hoorah!
Dragon contact and soft capture complete.
Smoke them if
There
you
you
got 'em.
heard Dragon has successfully docked to the International Space Station. We have contact and soft capture confirmed. Soft capture meaning that the initial soft capture ring around Dragon has physically connected with the International Docking Adapter. And this is just the first part of the overall docking sequence, Anna.
And so we did have that contact confirmed at 9:04 p.m. Pacific, 11:04 p.m. Central, while both Dragon and the International Space Station were flying 260 statute
Soft
miles.
capture ring retraction in progress.
Flying 260 statute miles over the Atlantic Ocean. And we did just hear confirmation that that soft capture ring is now beginning to retract. So they're beginning those steps to firmly attach Dragon to the International Space Station so that we can have what is known as a hard capture.
And again, as we mentioned earlier, like all the timings of these events are a little nebulous and they can change around by a couple of minutes here. So while we were expecting completion of we're expecting the completion of soft capture ring retraction, which we heard was already underway in just a few minutes. That will be followed by the start of the hard capture sequence, which is a series of 12 hooks that are separated into 2 batches of 6 that drive between Dragon and the International Space Station to really hard connect them together. And then after we have that, we have a whole bunch of other things that sort of come into place at that point once Dragon is securely on the Harmony module of the ISS. Once those soft capture systems retract, the spacecraft will we're getting closer for the hard capture. And then and that's about a 15-minute process.
And so once those hooks are fully driven, so those 2 sets of 6 hooks for a total of 12, then we
Look
will
at the
see those
excitement on
umbilicals
her
deploy.
face.
And again, that
She's
helps
thrilled.
to hardline the data and power from the International Space Station to Dragon. And then the crew on the International Space Station, as well as Dragon, will get ready for the hatch opening operation. So they will have to pressurize the vestibule. Again, that is that space between the Dragon hatch and the Space Station hatch that was previously exposed to the vacuum of space.
Just
Prior
smack
to
it.
this
Smack it hard.
docking. Again, we had
Give
that
it a good
docking
whack.
initial capture at 9:04 p.m. Pacific. So they will work to pressurize that space, perform a series of leak checks, and then once everything is good and they get the go-ahead, they will open those hatches. Again, there's the hatch on Dragon that has to be open, as well as the station hatch, to then bring the crew tent onto the International Space Station, and there you're actually getting a live view from the International Space Station, looking at the station hatch that will have
That's what
to
I'm
be
looking forward
opened
to.
before you can get to the Dragon
All
hatch
the
and bring
hugs
the
and the
crew on
crazy
board.
hair.
And they will be welcomed by the Expedition 72 crew, and they will have a brief welcoming ceremony, and then they will go into a safety briefing and get up to speed and adjust to life on station, again completing that handover period with the Crew 9 crew before Crew 9 returns home.
What do you think happens when the astronauts get home?
Because as
The
exciting as the
discussions.
last 28 hours have
So,
been from
honey, it's
launch
been
until
10 months.
docking, this is just the beginning of a
Any
multi-month
news for
mission
me?
for Crew 10. They're joining the Expedition 72 crew, which has been ongoing for the last few months aboard the International Space Station. And about a month from now, when a Soyuz crew rotation from Russia completes, that will actually mark the start of Expedition 73, which our Crew 10 crew will be joining. And of course, there are about 200 science experiments that the crew will be performing over the course of their multi-month mission up there. And I can't wait to see it and everything that they're going to be able to do up there.
So they will be contributing to about 200 different experiments and technology demonstrations from human research. They're doing some flammability studies.
Ring retraction complete. Docking sequence is holding for MCS reconfiguration.
Yeah, she looks like a NASA doctor.
And we did just hear confirmation that the soft capture ring has been fully retracted. So again, that soft capture that happened with the initial contact
shout out
about
to
4 minutes
Mesh.
ago at 9:04 p.m. Pacific, 10:04 p.m. No, 11:04 p.m. Central, as the International Space Station and Dragon were flying over the Atlantic Ocean. They are going to hold that docking's hard capture sequence a little bit to make some final configurations.
She's lovely, but she just
we
looks
do expect that
robotic, you know,
hard
kind of
capture
like she's
process to take about
disinterested. But
15 minutes. So we have
maybe that's just
about
her.
10 or so more minutes to go there. The next step in that process will be to begin to deploy those hooks. Again, there are 12 total hooks that have to fully engage and really bring Dragon in for a nice hard seal to the
Well,
International Space
13-year-old me
Station
is
for
really
docking
trying
port.
not to say anything.
And sort of like a lot of things with spaceflight, docking is not just a singular instantaneous event when the two vehicles actually meet and connect with one another. There's the soft capture, which we're through with Dragon right now. There's also, you know, like the vehicles are moving in relation to one another at docking. So they've also got to make sure that any motion between them is dampened out and that they are really ready for that hard capture connection.
And there you're seeing a live view on your screen on the right-hand side. That's a view from the International
Lynette,
Space
I
Station
agree with
of
you.
the Dragon spacecraft Endurance,
Great
now
answer.
docked to the International Space Station's Node 2
Well,
forward
first they have to learn how to
port.
walk again, but yeah.
And again, that
I agree.
docking took place at 9:04 p.m. following an approximately 28-hour journey.
Station Houston, on the Big Loop, MCS configured, proceeding with hook driving.
Station copies.
And there we hear good confirmation that what we were waiting for there and holding the docking sequence has been, we've gotten through that, and now we are going to begin that hard capture sequence, and that's what you were talking about, Anna, driving the series of 12 hooks, 6 at a time, to form that hard capture. And again, we expect that process to take about 15 minutes, but it really is great to see the Dragon Endurance back on the space station. Its 4th trip to space. This particular capsule has launched Crew 3, Crew 5, and Crew 7 missions, and of course returned those astronauts safely to Earth. And now it's doing it again for the 4th time for the Crew 10.
And it's the 10th total rotational mission for SpaceX flying crew to the International Space Station. Again, we did hear confirmation that the first set of 6 hooks for a total of 12 is now driving. So
good evening, Jim. How are you?
Capture, and then they will drive the second set of 6 hooks. And then from there, we will have confirmation of that hard capture, and then they will deploy some umbilicals and then begin that pressurization and leak check series.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier. Like I said,
opening and welcoming Crew 10 on board the International Space Station. Of course, it's been a pretty long journey for Crew 10.
You know, but yeah,
they've been traveling for over 28 hours now,
Very
following
Valley
a
girl.
liftoff yesterday of 7:03 p.m. Eastern, 4:03 p.m. Pacific from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida, Launch Complex Complex 39A. They had approximately 9-minute ride to orbit before we had that
Well, to
orbital
the hooker, of
insertion
course.
and second engine cutoff, and then they've been traveling in free flight since then. They had a series of burns that set them up for a docking today at 9:04 p.m. Pacific. They first had their phase burn, and that was completed yesterday at 4:52 p.m. Pacific, followed by a boost burn at
They look excited down
12:08
there, don't
p.m. Pacific, a
they?
close
Twirling
burn
their
a
papers.
little bit after that at 12:50 p.m. And then they had a mid-course out of plane burn, a transfer burn, co-elliptic burn, and just recently we had that approach initiation burn. So a lot of burns
Ooh.
to set them up and get them
I'm
on a
not
track
sure
to
that's
where they
good.
are now at the International Space
A
Station.
touch and go.
And
on
after
the
that
try
sequence
button.
of burns, it went pretty good after that point.
Isn't
We
it?
saw Dragon cruise through the waypoint 1 and
Sounds a little-
waypoint 0
No, I appreciate it, buddy.
targets of 400 and
Touch it and
220
go.
meters respectively from the International Space Station, and then close into that waypoint 2 where a brief hold and then right on in for a picture perfect docking over the North Atlantic.
And so we did have
They're doing
that
well.
soft capture at 9:04. Now the
So far.
first set of 6 hooks has
Knock on
fully
wood somewhere.
closed, and now the second set of 6 hooks is driving. Once that second and final set of hooks finishes closing and driving, we will have that hard capture complete. And then from there, they will, of course, begin the pressurization process of the vestibule.
And of course, part of Crew 10's arrival at the space station means that it's time for another crew who's been up there for a few months to come on home. So a few days after Crew 10, now that Crew 10 has docked, in a few days we will have the planned undocking and return of Crew 9,
California.
which includes NASA astronauts Nick
Not
Hague,
here with me
Butch
in
Willmore, and
Crazy
Suni
Land.
Williams, as well as Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov. 2 of them have been up there since September. Nick and Alexander launched on Crew 9 in September on the Crew 9 mission from Slick 40 at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. And of course, Butch and Suni were already on the space station and joined Crew 9 and will now be coming home on Dragon.
So they will do that brief handover period. The handover period between crews is pretty typical. We like to ensure a
I think a
continuous
lot of you are
presence of
probably in
U.S.
my age
crew,
group.
and then the Crew 9 will help
But
bring Crew 10 up to speed.
Back in the
as the
60s,
new
the average
arrivals
NASA
and get them
engineer
adjusted to space
on the
station
Apollo
life
program,
before
they were in their
return
early
home.
20s too. They just looked older.
And so
They
that
were
second
young.
set of 6 hooks continues to drive.
Just different clothes and different
We
hair.
had that initial docking about 10 minutes ago at 9:04 p.m. Pacific, and typically it takes about 15 minutes to have hard capture complete, so we should be approaching that milestone here shortly.
The Starship launches in Texas. This launched from Florida, but their control is in California for a while. It will probably move to Texas.
There we heard confirmation that we do have hard capture. So all 12 hooks have finished driving. And then from there, the umbilicals will start to deploy. And that again brings that hardline data and power from the International Space Station to Dragon. And then the pressurization of the vestibule will begin. And again, NASA astronaut Butch Willmore on the International Space Station side is on top to be to help with those hatch opening operations today. Again, we are expecting hatch opening about an hour and a half or so after or from now, and then from there will be a welcoming combined with the farewell remarks of Crew 10 since that handover is pretty short. And then from there they will adjust to station life. There will be a safety briefing, and then they'll get right into it as Expedition 72 members for the next month before they become Expedition 73.
And and you can see that's Suni Williams there in front of the hatch on the International Space Station side.
Suni's
So
like, okay, who's got my hair dyed?
Capture is complete.
It's been too long.
The docking sequence still proceeding though with Dragon. You mentioned those umbilicals that are now being driven between the vehicles to establish good power and data connections between the International Space Station and Dragon. Now we've talked a little bit about what the folks on the ISS side are doing.
This is what I'm waiting
getting
for. I hope it
those
doesn't take
hatches
too
ready
long.
inside Dragon. They're continuing to monitor the docking sequence as it progresses, and then they'll also be able to get out of their suits as well that they have been in for the last couple of hours as Dragon has approached the International Space Station.
So as Dragon crew gets out of their suits, of course, as we mentioned previously, NASA's astronaut Butch
Yeah,
Willmore
John,
is
YouTube
gonna
is
start
really
those hatch
jacked
opening
up.
operations.
And especially when it comes to Elon
And
Musk
there
and
on your
SpaceX,
screen, you are seeing NASA
they are
astronaut Nick Hague as well
they are
as Los
driving those
Cosmos
numbers
cosmonaut
down. I mean,
Ovchinin
obviously
as
for their
they
political reasons too, but
stand
it does
by
hurt
to
the
greet Crew
viewership.
10 members and welcome them as part of the International Space Station crew. Again, they are going to get that pressurization.
This guy's
process
not rushing
underway
at all, is
shortly,
he?
and they will pressurize that area known as the vestibule, which is the area between the Dragon hatch and the station hatch that was previously exposed to the vacuum of space. And then once that happens, they will conduct a series of leak checks. And there on your screen, you just saw NASA astronaut Suni Williams actually floating right in front of that hatch that will be open in just a little bit.
Dragon, SpaceX on the big loop. Docking sequence complete. Ground will be enabling hardline power and comm connections shortly. You are go to doff suits per procedure 4.012. Crew 10, welcome aboard the International Space Station.
I like this dude in the red shirt. He's not impressed.
SpaceX Houston and ISS, this is Dragon Mission Specialist Takuya Onishi on the big loop. We copy the docking sequence is complete. We are go for 4.012 for docking suits. And on behalf of the entire crew, I would like to thank all the partners, especially our SpaceX friends who trained us and enabled us to safely arrive at the International Space Station. It was so amazing to see the ISS shining in the darkness of space and symbolizing human beings, technology, and the international cooperation. And it's such a great honor for us to be part of this program. We have a lot of exciting work ahead of us that we are looking forward to. Again, thank you very much to everybody who helps us to get here.
Yeah, Crew 10 is just getting there. They're staying there.
And there you just heard some really nice words between Crew 10
Hey, look, she can
as they've
smile.
now arrived at the International Space Station. We
Her
do have
mouth
that
works.
confirmation of hard capture complete. Again, those words were coming from JAXA, or Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency astronaut Takuya Onishi, who is serving as one of the mission specialists for Crew 10. And so now with Dragon successfully and safely docked.
And Houston copies all. Welcome to the International Space Station, Crew 10. We look forward to your work and the spirit of cooperation with which you've arrived.
Thank you very much, Des.
And there's
open the
some
door.
words from the capsule communicator, Capcom
see
in
some hugs.
Houston, in the International Space Station Flight Control Room. Back to Crew 10, and again, now with Dragon docked, that's going to wrap us up for our coverage here in Hawthorne, but our coverage for Crew 10 won't stop there.
That's correct. It's great to see the Dragon Endurance docked back at the station and see Crew 10 ready to begin their multi-month mission in there. In a minute, we're going to toss it back to Gary in Mission Control Houston to take us through the vestibule depressurization hatch opening, and then we'll see NASA astronauts Anne McLean and Nicole Ayers
these
along
two
with
have to go to
JAXA,
bed.
or Japan Aerospace Exploration
Anyway.
Agency astronaut Takuya Onishi and Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov float into the International Space Station. But first, let's do a quick recap of how we got here. The crew suited up yesterday before
If we
their
lose this
launch
video
and then
link,
had
hang
their
on, I'll
ride to
switch
the
over to
pads
NASCAR.
in those sleek-looking
Well, that's
Teslas
okay.
before ingressing an even sleeker-looking Dragon. They lifted off right on time from the Kennedy Space Center at Pad 39A at 7:03 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday, March 14th. Stage 1 successfully returned to a landing at Landing Zone 1 for recovery and
he's going for
reuse
a
a few
smoke.
minutes later. Dragon separated from the second stage of Falcon 9, and once it was safely in orbit, deployed its nose cone to reveal that docking adapter and all the navigation aids needed to get to the International Space Station. Dragon also completed
And her
5
skin
major
is
burns
flawless.
on its journey to the International Space Station, coming in for a docking at
Miss being young.
9:04 p.m. Pacific Time, 11:04 p.m. Central Time today, March 15th, 2025. And it was Dragon's 10th crew rotation mission for NASA and the Commercial Crew Program.
That's right. And now that Crew 10 has arrived to the International Space Station, we are looking ahead to the return of Crew 9. And we will be taking you along as they return home after their long duration stay on board the International Space Station. Teams will be assessing return dates, which will then be announced on nasa.gov. So be sure to tune in as NASA and SpaceX will then bring you live coverage every step of their return home. And you can also follow SpaceX and NASA on social media for real time updates. But thank you again for watching our coverage of docking, and go NASA, go SpaceX, and go to Crew 10 and Crew 9. For those of you watching on X, please head over to NASA Plus to follow the coverage of hatch opening and welcoming live.
So thanks everyone for joining us here in Hawthorne. Thank you specifically to Anna for joining us from Johnson Space Center. And
That's it? I might have to change channels here in a minute. Wait, this is good. No, what do I do?
And thank you everyone again for tuning in. We'll now go ahead and pass it over to NASA's Gary Jordan at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, who will continue sharing the mission of hatch opening and welcoming as the crew prepares to board their home for the next few months, the International Space Station. Thank you so much.
What's going on? All right, let me see something here. Don't go away. Let's see. Oh, here we go. See if we can get some sound. Well, there's not much going on. I don't know how long it's going to take before they open the hatch. Apparently, it's going to be a little while. You know what? I'm going to see what's going on X while we do this. Man, I wish I was better at this technology thing.
This is Mission Control Houston. You're looking at a live view of the International Space Station Flight Control Room. Thanks to Anna and Chris over in SpaceX Mission Control in Hawthorne, California. We just wrapped up our joint coverage of Crew 10's arrival to the International Space Station, docking at 11:04 p.m. Central Time, 9:04 p.m. Pacific. The International Space Station and Dragon were flying 260 statute miles over the Atlantic Ocean at the time of docking. Now that the docking sequence is complete, which means the ring is fully retracted, hooks are driven, and the umbilical is extended to draw power from the International Space Station and transfer data, crew inside Dragon is getting prepared for the next set of procedures to configure Dragon in such a way for its extended stay aboard the International Space Station, while the crew aboard the International Space Station prepares for opening up the hatches on the other side. Now, the hatch opening sequence is quite extensive. We're expecting the Dragon hatch to be opened a little less than an hour and a half from now. The projected time is 12:45 a.m. Central Time on March 16th. However, this is a variable time. It is the expected time that the Dragon hatch will open. Shortly after, we are planning a welcome ceremony as well as a farewell ceremony, given a shorter duration handover period for the crew aboard the International Space Station before Crew 9 undocks. We will say hello to the Crew 10 astronauts and cosmonaut aboard the International Space Station, welcomed by Expedition 72, while Crew 9 says farewell ahead of
Is that Central Time? Because it's like
next few days
9:30 here on the West Coast.
Getting their SpaceX Dragon spacecraft configured for undock and return to splash down off the coast of Florida. Right now, you're looking at Dragon Endurance.
So
docked
what,
at the
2
Fort
hours?
Worth port of the International Space
No.
Station. Crew 9, Dragon, docked to the Zenith port. These views provided by an external camera.
You know, I can just leave this
on
link
the
open all
exposed
night and just
facility outside of the
come
Japanese
back when
module.
something happens. It's going to take 2 hours. Anybody have anything exciting to talk about?
Right
I'm
now,
not,
we are in an orbital sunrise, so we are seeing
Okay, 20 minutes. That's good.
Dragon being illuminated by the sun as we cross the Terminator line. We're just west off the coast of South Africa now, 267 statute miles right above that coast. In fact, on a southeast trajectory, heading into an orbital daytime, starting to see
Hey,
the
let's do
horizon of Earth being illuminated.
let's do a
by the
rapid
sphere.
fire here. Everybody, if you
We're again
want,
following the procedures inside
throw in
the
the
International
comment
Space
section
Station.
where
We've
you
been
are,
hearing
state,
the voice of
country,
NASA
planet.
astronaut Nick Hague,
Let me know
whose
where you're watching from,
responsibility
if you'd like.
for the past
We'll
few
fill some
hours
time.
has been the monitoring
I'll admit,
task
I'm not,
of
I'm an
Crew
old
10's
guy. I'm not
arrival
really
to
good
the
at this
International Space Station,
filibustering on
receiving
YouTube
data
thing.
via a common communications for
Is
visited
what it is.
vehicles link between the International Space Station
Here we go.
and
Texas,
Dragon, providing telemetry and allowing Hague
Arizona. I
to
got family in
monitor
Mesa,
Dragon's safe approach,
Vancouver. Got family in
docking again at
Washington.
11:04 p.m. Central Time. Now that
Nice.
Dragon is docked and the crew is getting ready to open the hatch on the International Space Station side,
UT.
it's Butch Willmore.
Oh, is that Utah? Or is
who
that
is
something
tasked
different?
with the responsibility of opening up the hatches. In fact, he's
Pennsylvania.
in the Node 2 module right now. The Node 2 forward hatch is open.
Chicago. Uh-oh.
Throughout our coverage today, it will take some time to open up those hatches. It's quite a lengthy procedure that needs to be done carefully, and we will be continuing to orbit
Bethesda,
the Earth,
Maryland.
handing over between our coverage of TDRS satellites
We
that
got a
are
good
providing
selector
video
from all over the
from the
country.
International Space Station. We're now in a short handover period and expecting to regain those views very shortly. But for now, you're
Springfield, is
seeing
that
the
anywhere near
International
Cleveland?
Space Station
My
flight control teams
first wife
here
was
in
from
Houston,
Cleveland.
Texas.
Oh, I love
Allison
Utah.
Bollinger, that is the flight director for today.
Monterey's nice.
On Dragon to ground.
Hey, John.
You're coming a little broken.
Merritt Island. When I lived in Florida, I used to love going there. I may go back to Florida.
Negative, Butch. We got
All
you
right,
to
here we
handover.
go.
urine hose for the procedure.
Another Florida.
Okay, sorry. Equalization valve APAS was open at 0426.
When did it become St. Patrick's Day?
We were going to give you that call when you were drying your suits, but in section 5,
Toronto, eh?
400, we're going to have you guys waive
Glad to
every
have you.
step but the last one. How copy?
Copenhagen, Denmark.
Say again for
I know where Denmark is, and I know where Copenhagen is. But if you ask me to find it on a map,
And repeating my
Let me
last,
know.
but for that call in
No, thank you.
section 5 of 4.400, we are not going to have you perform any steps except for the last one. How copy?
My brother used to live in Islamorada. Hour and a half from Cleveland. Coldest I've ever been was Cleveland, Ohio.
Trying again, shorter, do not perform section 5. How copy?
Can we buy Greenland? I don't know why. Greenland's cold. Just use it when you need it. Hey, Canada. Yeah, shout out to the Arlington representation.
Dragon on Dragon to ground.
Houston. I'd love to see some females on the channel. I mean, of course, but I mean, this is a very male-dominated audience I have. So, Lindsay, and forgive me if I'm misgendering you. Whoever pictured that is looks female to me.
Section 5 of 4.400. How copy?
Canada, 51st.
Dragon, copy on the big loop. We can skip section 5 of 4.400.
Just across the pond.
That's a good readback.
June, how are you? Another female. I hope I got that right. I mean, I know your pictures. Thank you so much.
This is Mission Control Houston, following along through the procedures. Crew 10 working through the steps inside Dragon Endurance, a view from which you are seeing the outside of
Is
the
that castle
spacecraft from
shaking,
the
or is that
camera
just me?
mounted
Am I
on the
having a
exposed
stroke?
facility of the Japanese module. Inside, the crew are working through steps. They wore their SpaceX launch and entry suits through the duration of today's procedure, docking to the International Space Station as a safety precaution, closing those visors and having the suits as an extra layer of protection. Now that we are
Good night, Yeti. Thank
docked
you
and
so
hard docked to the
much for
International
spending
Space
time with
Station,
us.
that docking sequence
Next time
complete,
you see me on live,
crew
jump
may
on.
doff or
Always
take
look
off their
forward to seeing you.
suits
Thank you.
and start configuring the cabin of Dragon for
That's what I'm
opening up
waiting
the
for,
hatch.
Lynette. I'm going to see the float and the hug and the hair and all that
You'll
good
hear some of
stuff.
those
Crazy
communications through
hair.
Dragon to ground, those communications intended for the Dragon crew. Some of the communications you'll hear on the big loop and the space to ground loops, because there are crews on both sides of that hatch working to
TH. I'm
welcome
sorry,
the crew
Johnny. Where
aboard.
is that?
Each has their own respective role.
Anywhere near Hong Kong? My brother, if he's watching, I don't know what time it is in Hong Kong, but he's there.
Again, while the Endurance crew works to doff their suits and configure the Dragon cabin, International Space Station flight engineers working to open up the hatches and welcome the crew aboard. Confirm that the Node 2 forward hatch is already opened inside of Node 2. Next will be the APAS hatch. The APAS hatch is the last hatch on the International Space Station side. There is a vestibule that separates that hatch from the Dragon hatch, and that vestibule right now is at vacuum. Part of the procedures that the crew will undergo, namely NASA astronaut Butch Willmore, will be to turn a valve and introduce air into that vestibule, bringing it up to pressure. Pressure inside the International Space Station and Dragon is that of sea level, 14.7 psi. The procedure to take that vestibule up to vacuum is slow and steady. They make sure that there are no leaks at about 5 pounds per square inch, settling there, making sure that there are no leaks present before bringing it fully up to pressure at 14.7 psi.
ISS power connection established.
Part of the docking sequence is to extend an umbilical from Dragon to the International Space Station that provides power and communication drawn from the station to Dragon, so Dragon no longer has to
Okay,
rely on
Johnny, I
battery
got you now.
power. And
That's
the solar
Thailand,
arrays
right?
that you can see, the black paneled section at the trunk from this view, that call was
Yeah,
confirming
welcome,
that power
Canada.
is successfully being drawn from the International Space Station into Dragon. Dragon no longer needing to rely on battery power.
Indeed, a lady. Yes, you are. And thank you so much for bringing up the demographics and the class of my channel, too. We need to bring up the class around here. Oh, a diagram. I read that wrong. Well, yeah. I mean, in space, anything can happen. No, seriously, is that picture moving? Do you see, or is it just me? Just a mirage? Looks like it's shaking or something. So I don't know what time they're going to open the hatch. I saw somebody said what, like 20 minutes, 15 minutes. I don't know how long it's going to be. But I'm just going to leave this on. You know, if I disappear for a minute to go get a refreshment or walk the cat or something. I'm looking forward to this entering the capsule deal. It is moving. Thank you. Man, I thought I was having a stroke. The other day I was at the car dealer and I started smelling burning rubber, and the car dealer's like right next to the freeway. I was getting nervous, man. I'm like, man, I hope that's really rubber. But it was. So I held off the stroke for another year. You got to admit, I mean, SpaceX does it right. NASA, Boeing, whatever you think of the guy, they have got it nailed down. Yeah, they get explosions. I mean, that's part of the exploration. You have to work the bugs out. They expect it. Apollo, they all did it. That's how it all went. But SpaceX has the efficiency model down for sure. Okay, there you go. Oh, 2 hours till handshakes? So you mean it's going to be 2 hours until they actually get inside? Well, what should we do? We can always sign off and then come back later on when it gets closer to handshake time. What's the consensus? I mean, I guess we, sit here and look at this for 2 hours is kind of senseless. If anybody has any new, hit the Twitter machine, hit the news and see what they say, and let us know. Yes, they got to slowly pressurize the capsule. Okay. They landed the base, but they lost the other one again. They're still working the bugs out. Go for a burger. Okay. So here's what I'm going to do. Want a bigger picture? Oh, that's my beautiful fake living room. I'm sorry for the camera, but my other camera with this crappy StreamYard. Yes, I said crappy StreamYard. If you're listening, don't use StreamYard. I'll power down for a little while, and then I'll find out exactly when the handshakes and the hugs are going to happen, and I will come back on the air, and who's ever up is up, and if it's just me, it'll be fun to do that too. But until then, I want to thank everybody, all of you, and sexist as it sounds, especially my females out there. You guys are in high demand on the channel and YouTube in the aviation world. But thank you all for joining me, and hopefully within the next, I don't know, 40 hour and 45 minutes, 2 hours, we'll all be back here again, or some of us will be back here again. But be sure and check out today's video. It's a big one on Boeing. I appreciate you all stopping by, and I'll say goodnight for now, and maybe we'll meet up again later. Thanks for stopping by.